Hoi hoi. Not too long ago, I posted a video on using ultrasonic microphones. These are microphones that record beyond the human range of hearing, so we can take those frequencies we don't normally hear and bring them down into the audible spectrum and get some really cool sound design material out of it. In that video, I talked about the very popular ultrasonic microphone, the Sanken CO-100K. Now, while it's a great microphone, I also mentioned that it costed $2,500. But there is a potential solution. Enter the Sonorous Object SO.4. This microphone is an ultrasonic microphone as well, but only costs about $100. So in this video, I want to compare and contrast the two microphones to see if we can use the cheaper one in the same context that we would use the more expensive one. So what I'm going to do is show you some recordings of my voice, a kazoo that I got for working on Outer Wilds Echoes of the Eye, a thing called a thunder tube, and also some bees that my buddy ZW Buckley and I recorded here in Seattle. We went over to the Woodland Bee Company here, and the owner, Jason, was incredibly kind and let us into his bee farm to record them. So special thanks to Jason over at Woodland Bee Company for letting two weirdos into his bee farm to record the sound of his bees using ultrasonic mics. So if you're here in Seattle, be sure to check them out because they have excellent honey too. So without further ado, let's get into comparing these two mics. All right, let's compare and contrast some recordings with these ultrasonic microphones. So what I have here in Isotope RX are the different recordings I made with my voice, the thunder tube, the kazoo, all that good stuff with the SO4 and the CO-100K. The CO-100K being the very expensive $2,500 microphone and the SO4 being the $100 one. So let's just take a look at my voice to start with. So right now we're looking at my voice with the CO-100K, the $2,500 microphone. And you can see here in Isotope, we have frequencies going up to around 80 kilohertz. So lots of ultrasonic frequency material in here. But if I switch over to the SO4, you can see we lose out on some of it. We get up to about maybe 55, maybe 60K. So we still get plenty of ultrasonic material, but not as much as the 100K. So just to flip back and forth, you'll see the SO4 here and the CO-100K here. But before we get into any sort of processing or anything, let's listen to the raw quality of the sound, starting with the expensive mic, the CO-100K. Okay, so sounds nice and clean, nice and clear. Great, fantastic. Now let's switch over to the SO4. So the quality's actually really good with both of them. I don't have any complaints with either. They both sound absolutely solid. I have zero complaints. Especially for a $100 microphone, this sounds really crisp and clear. But let's get into what ultrasonic mics are so known for and so useful for, which is taking these recordings and then pitch shifting them downwards. So we take these frequencies that are inaudible and make them audible. So let's switch back to the CO-100K and start pitching things down. So I'm going to stick in Isotope RX for now, just so you can visually see what's happening. So let's take this fourth one here. Cool, great. Let's take that one, highlight it, and let's pitch it down. So I'm going to go down here to time and pitch, and just this one right here, let's pitch it down by, let's say, 20 semitones. So you can see what happened there was these high frequencies that were there before got pitched down, and now we have more of those ultrasonic frequencies now within the audible range. There's still some stuff that might reach past 20K. You can see maybe we're getting up to 25K, but let's take a listen to this now. So that sounds really crisp and clear. So I'm going to undo that. Let's hear the original. And now I'll repitch it down. So that sounds really crisp and clear with me not being a voice actor at all and just kind of growling into a mic. That sounds great. That sounds really, really cool with no effort at all. Now let's do the same with the SO4. So I'll take that fourth one. Again, let's hear it raw. Nice and clean, very good. And we will pitch it down the same amount. So you can hear it does sound pretty good, but not as crisp and clean as the CO-100K, the expensive mic. You get more high frequency material. It sounds more real with this source recording from the CO-100K. So with something like a voice, this is what I'd reach for. But hey, for $100, 1/25th the price, you're still getting a lot of extra high frequency material. So maybe I pitch this one down a little less. Let's make it so it's, you know, maybe negative 10-ish semitones. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I pitch it down just a little bit more, maybe like 6 more semitones. So definitely still more crisp and clear than what we would hear with a standard microphone, but not as good as what we hear with the CO-100K. All right, now let's go on to that neat little thunder tube thing. So again, we're with the CO-100K, the expensive mic here, and we have the SO4 compared and contrasted here. So yet again, you can see we have more high frequency material, as you can see in this kind of blue and orange frequency spectrum here, than the SO4. We're losing out on some of that. We still get extra, we're still getting more above the range of human hearing, but just not quite as much. So let's take a quick listen to some of these. That's pretty cool. Nice and clean. Great. Now let's take a listen. Maybe we skip ahead to this one. Cool. Great. And we'll take a listen to the SO4. Probably sounds very similar. Yeah, quite similar, nothing too crazy, nothing too different here. So let's start by pitching down. Let's go with the second one here. I do like that one. So I'll take this, maybe highlight that much, and we'll do the same thing. So let's bring it down by, let's start with, you know, maybe negative 15 semitones and see how that sounds. It's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. Maybe I don't want to pitch it down so much so we don't lose so much of that info. So maybe like negative 10-ish. I do like that. That is pretty cool. I could use that for some good source material. Let's try that on the first one. Let's hear it raw. Cool, and I'll pitch that down. Again, another 10. Very neat. This could be a pretty cool source material for a boom, maybe even an explosion sweetener, something like that. Let's do the same with the SO4. So we'll take that first one and we'll pitch it down the same amount, around 10 semitones. Let's hear it raw. Now I'll pitch it down. And let's go and compare and contrast with the CO-100K. Now back to the SO4. Back to the 100K. And back to the SO4. So in this circumstance, I'd honestly take either. The 100K has some extra high frequency material, but for something low and boomy like this, it doesn't matter that much. I would, of course, prefer something with more high frequency material. It allows me to manipulate it further. But in this case, I'm not too convinced that this is worth 25 times the amount. Now, before we go on to the Bs, we also have the Kazoo. So if we take our Kazoo recording, you can see right here with the CO-100K, we're again capturing stuff up to barely, maybe 70 kilohertz. So that's pretty cool. And then when we go over to the SO4, we're stopping at around maybe 35, maybe 40-ish, somewhere in that zone. So we do lose out on a fair amount of high frequency material here, as you can see as I swap back and forth. Let's take this Kazoo and we'll just listen to some of it raw with the CO-100K. Just beautiful. Great, and now let's listen to it with the SO4 just a little bit. So the recordings themselves, extremely similar, nothing crazy. But let's get pitching down. So I take this, let's do even further. Let's make it, let's go a little crazy. Let's make it like negative 30 and see what happens. So let's take maybe this third one here, the shorter one. Yeah, let's take this third one on the CO-100K and let's pitch it down by 30 semitones, so more than 2 octaves. And now let's take a listen. It's very buzzy, so let's actually make it less. Maybe I'll do 2 octaves exactly, so negative 24. Ooh. That's cool. You put some reverb on that, ooh, you got a cool sound. You got a cool horror sound right there. Now let's take that third one again with the SO4 and pitch it down the same amount. And you can probably tell where this will go. We won't get as much high frequency material, but it'll probably still sound pretty solid. Not bad by any means. Let's listen to the 100K again. So you can hear we're still retaining some of that high frequency buzz that makes it sound a lot cleaner, maybe a lot more usable in some circumstances, whereas the SO4, a little bit more muddy, a little bit more muted. We're not getting as many high frequencies, but still sounds pretty good. I'm not trying to write this microphone off, especially for $100. Again, you're still recording some high frequency material. Now let's switch over to the bees. So with these bee recordings, you can see here that we have a lot of high frequency material with the CO-100K. Fantastic. That's exactly what we expect at this point. And if I switch over to the SO4, you can see we're losing out on quite a bit. We're not getting very much ultrasonic frequency here. But there's something I want to point out. With the CO-100K, I'm recording at a different angle than I am with the SO4. The SO4 was actually inserted into a beehive, so you get a different recording altogether. They're in completely different perspectives. The CO-100K has the disadvantage of being big, so I couldn't really put it into the hive. And the SO4 being super, super tiny, the beekeeper, Jason, was kind enough to put it in the hive. So let's take a listen. These are the same recording, the same time, the same place of the same object of the beehive, but one is outside and one is on the inside of the hive. So the CO-100K is on the outside of the hive. We have more high frequency material, but you'll hear you get kind of a different quality of recording with the SO4. So I'll just hit play here. Great, we get some bee recordings, nothing too crazy there. That is the CO-100K. Now let's switch to the SO4 at around the same time mark. And again, this is inside the hive. So we have an interesting advantage here. Because we can insert this microphone into smaller spaces, we can get up way closer to the subject. You can see we can get a lot more bassy material. So honestly, for this circumstance, I personally like the SO4 recording more, even though I don't have as many high frequencies. But in this circumstance, I get a lot more bassy stuff, and I can use that for different sorts of sound design material. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean one is better than the other, or one is more useful, or anything like that. But it does mean that in some circumstances, in many circumstances, it's great to use multiple microphones whenever you can. And in this circumstance, it turns out the cheaper mic gave me a recording that I'm happier with. Now, you're going to hear something somewhat interesting when I pitch these down. So let's start with the SO4, the microphone that's in the hive, the cheaper one. And I will pitch this down. And let's just keep it subtle. Let's make it like 1 octave, so negative 12 semitones here. Great, now let's take a listen. So because this microphone's able to capture those kind of closer up bassy bee sounds, we get some really cool stuff here. And honestly, I'm able to use this for any sort of horror thing or anything that needs to be menacing really quickly and really easily just by pitching it down and maybe adding some reverb later. But let's do the same on this one here, the Sanken CO-100K. From a different perspective, I'll pitch it down 12 semitones as well. So you can hear these have pretty drastically different recording qualities, even though they're recorded at the same time on the same object, but in different perspectives. I honestly think that the one with the SO4 is even more fun and more usable. But let's pitch down the Sanken CO-100K even more because we still have so much high frequency material there. Now let's take a listen. Now we may need to EQ out some of those highs, those hissy little bits, but we're not getting as much interesting content right away out of this one. Now there's plenty we can do, I'm sure, but right away we're not necessarily seeing as much interesting stuff as we do as quickly with this SO4 that just happened to have a better angle and I think a better recording. Now let's pitch this down just a little bit more, this SO4. Let's make it so we go down, let's say maybe -6 semitones. Let's see what happens there. So you can see here with the SO4, just with 2 pitch shifting operations, I get a pretty usable sound, a pretty usable drone. Whereas with the CO-100K, I get something that's kind of high pitched, kind of artifacty. I'm sure I can do some cool stuff with this. I'm sure I can pitch it down more. But I'm gonna have to do some more work with it, and I'm gonna get a result that maybe I'm not as immediately happy with as the SO4. So it doesn't necessarily mean with this CO-100K, oh, high frequencies equals better, it's always worth paying for. This circumstance, because it's a bigger mic, because it gets more high frequencies, it actually gave me a recording that I'm less happy with than this little guy that I can put in places that the bigger mic can't get into, and thus get me a closer, and in this case, more usable recording. So while yes, the Sanken CO-100K reliably gets more frequencies and at a higher level, it doesn't necessarily mean that that means it's always the better choice. So for 99% of sound designers, the SO4 I think is just a good part of kit to have and good to carry around with you so long as you have something that can record in these higher frequency ranges. But broadly speaking, this is a great microphone to have. It sounds very clean, it sounds very clear, it sounds very crisp, and you get some of those ultrasonics as well. Maybe not as much as the CO-100K, but it's still plenty good. All right, so what do you think? Is this $100 tiny little microphone comparable to the $2,500 Sanken? I would say for 1/25th the price, yeah, the Sonorous Works SO4 is a great thing to buy instead of the Sanken. Even though the SO4 couldn't quite capture the same range as the Sanken, it still did a very good job. I would say if you're a pro sound designer working full-time and you record your own samples regularly, the Sonorous Works SO4 is a no-brainer. I think it's just worth having in your kit because getting those ultrasonic sounds can help you in so many ways. The Sanken, on the other hand, maybe get a client to pay for it. Now, speaking of being a pro sound designer, if you want to make a full-time living in game audio, then sign up for my free newsletter down in the description below or in the card up above. When you sign up, you get access to 2 free courses that help you build your career in game audio from scratch. You also get free resources like free sounds, ebooks, consistent advice from me on how to build your career, and much more. So if you want to grow your career as a full-time composer or sound designer in games, that's the move. Sign up for the newsletter. And at the time of this recording, my newer premium courses are also for sale down in the description below. Those courses being step-by-step synthesis and step-by-step sound design, both of which teach you the ins and outs of using synthesizers in your sound design workflow, as well as how to just become a better sound designer, whether you're a beginner or more advanced. And step-by-step sound design even features getting feedback from yours truly on your work. So if you're interested at the time of this filming, they're on sale in the description below, so check them out. All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Go pet a dog.